Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore, and this is Reality Asserts Itself. We're continuing our series of interviews with Bob Moses, who was one of the most influential leaders of the Civil Rights Movement. He's the founder of the Algebra Project, was also one of the leaders of the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project, and Bob joins us again in the studio. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
So one more time, Bob is an educator, a civil rights activist during the 60s. He was the field secretary for SNCC. He also was an outspoken critic of the Vietnam War. And he's the founder of the Algebra Project, as I mentioned. He's also the author of Radical Equations, Civil Rights from Mississippi to the Algebra Project, and co-editor of Quality Education as a Constitutional Right, creating a grassroots movement to transform public schools. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
So we're going to pick up where we were. I asked you at the end of the last segment what you learned from the hootenannies, and you talked about that there seemed to be a lynching every week in Florida. What else did you pick up in terms of the politics of that period and politics of the milieu? There's a lot of talk about socialism. There's a lot of talk about a different way to have, who has power and who owns stuff. At the same time, there's tremendous pressure in the culture and the media against even talking about that kind of stuff. As you mentioned, McCarthyism, it's considered un-American to even discuss such things.
Yeah.
You're old enough to start understanding all this.
Yeah, but I'm not really attracted to politics as I see it around me in Harlem, or really to a kind of the kind of talk that young people would do who were part of that, sort of environment. I'm really focused. I'm busy, right? So Stuyvesant is my last 2 years at Stuyvesant. We're in a morning session, so school goes from 8 to 12. Takes me an hour to get to school. I have a job, right? So I leave school. I'm working at NYU Medical Library. And then I'm playing basketball at the Harlem Y. Right, so 3 nights a week.
And if I'd asked you then what you think you'd be doing 5 or 10 years later, what would have been your answer?
Well, so I'm a kid who hasn't thought much about career. Right? So when I get to college and I'm majoring in philosophy, everybody's asking me, what are you going to do with philosophy, right? And I'm not caring.
You got an uncle who's a rising officer in the military. You got another uncle who's an architect. Did you think you were heading towards some kind of professional career?
No, I actually didn't think. And the uncle who was I wasn't really looking at my uncles as role models. And there wasn't any pressure in my family, towards career. And so I'm a kid who decides that I'm going to study philosophy, and I really don't care. People are asking me, what are you going to do with philosophy, right? And so I have no idea, but I'm interested in it.
Well, if you're not that interested in the politics at the time, when do the coin starts dropping for you that you're going to start committing yourself to the civil rights movement?
The sit-ins, right.
When was that and what happened?
When those pictures start appearing in 1960, right, in February, March, right, 1960, I'm watching the young people sit in through the lens of the New York Times. This is the first time that young black men and women are on the front page of the New York Times.
Tell us
talking
bit of the story
to
of the
nation about what I feel inside now, right? Because I've now gone through Hamilton. Hamilton is a fraternity school, right? When I get there are 3 blacks in a small school, 525 students, right? At most 3 black students. It's the guy who interviews me says, we're a fraternity school. I say yes. And basically that means you know that you cannot join any of these fraternities, right? I make a trade-off about the school I want to go to. I don't want to go down south and into the segregated, south. And I want to go to a small school where I can play ball, right? So I played basketball through college. And I want a good education, right? So I make a trade-off, and I actually get funded. I get a full scholarship to go to this school, right? And so that's what happens. I go to Hamilton, and then I go leave Hamilton, go to Harvard, right? Again, Harvard in the 1950s, blacks are scarcer than hen's teeth, right? So I'm the only black in the philosophy department in the graduate school at Harvard. I think that I'm going to Harvard so that I can really test how I stand. I'm really disappointed when my roommate tells me that the professor tells him that he's not really, he doesn't say afraid, but he's uneasy about calling on me, right? So what it means is I don't escape this issue of some objective,
Harvard, one of Harvard's role at least, is to train people to join the ruling elite and become those who can help rule one way or the other. We've seen it more in a more modern sense. We see Barack Obama winds up president. I mean, there's somewhere.
I'm not thinking about that.
I'm saying you are, but Harvard as an institution is
right.
Certainly one of the things it does.
And I know that. I mean, so part of who's going to Harvard? Well, black people are going to Harvard who are part of the black elite, right? And I know about them because I know about them through my cousins, right? Because through their family circumstances, they are part of the black elite, right? And they're sending their kids to private schools and then on to Ivy League schools. But my part of the family is not that at all. We're not doing that. So I know about it, but I'm not part of it.
So tell us the story of the sit-ins and then what effect that had on you.
So what I did when I saw the sit-ins, this is the black students at the HBCUs, the historically black universities, have decided that they've had enough, right? And so they began sitting in at Woolworths and the Five and Dime stores at the lunch counter.
This is right across the country?
Across the Mid-South, right? So it's Atlanta, which is not the Mid-South, but Atlanta is a big city in the Mid-South, right? But Tennessee, North Carolina, right? Kentucky, right? And some in South Carolina, Orangeburg, South Carolina, right? So something's up, right? And what I see watching their faces is I see them looking like I'm feeling inside, right? Based on Stuyvesant, Hamilton, Harvard, right?
And this is a time when young black students could not eat at the lunch counter at Woolworths.
Well, the South is still, it's the apartheid of the South. I mean, the South really is just running an apartheid system around Jim Crow. Blackman's book, Slavery by Another Name. Doug Blackman, he really names this era because we're really talking about the era from roughly after 1875 when the Democrats, by really terror and violence, overthrow the state legislature in Mississippi, and William Alexander Percy, who is this plantation owner from Greenville, goes into the Mississippi legislature to oversee the articles of impeachment against Albert Ames, who is the governor that has been elected by black votes of Mississippi. and he's the respectable face of this terror, right? And so from that era right down to the civil rights movement, I think he names it. It's slavery by another name. Francis Biddle is amazing. He's the Attorney General under Roosevelt. In 1941, December 12th, he issues Circular 3951 to every state attorney general and says that from now on, you should prosecute peonage not as indebtedness, but prosecuted as involuntary servitude and slavery, right? So what Blackmun does is he investigates as a Wall Street Journal reporter. He asks a really amazing, interesting question. He says, what if we looked at American corporations vis-a-vis the industrialization and the use of black labor in this country in the same way as we looked at German corporations vis-a-vis the Holocaust, right? And he writes an article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal about this and gets an amazing response from all over the country, people who are writing him about relatives, right, that got caught up in this involuntary servitude, slavery, of the founding of the steel industry, right, in this country, right? And so then he goes off and does this investigation, uncovering tens of thousands of black young men who are conscripted on vagrancy and sent into the mines, right, in Birmingham, right? So one way of thinking about what was happening with the students, right, in 1960, I didn't understand it then, but they are actually breaking, right, this sort of era, right, of slavery by another name, which happens after the Civil War and after Reconstruction is ended. And it ends in Mississippi in 1875 when the Democrats take over by terror and violence. So you got another almost 3/4 of a century.
We're going to continue this discussion with Bob Moses on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network. Please join us.